Hello and good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's session for SGX markets. We're going to talk about this company called Emperador. If you can hear me, can you just say yes in a comment? All right, let's just start today's presentation. If you can hear me well, you can just say yes. Yeah, just going to start. All right. Whatever that's being shared here today on this topic on Emperador, it's one of the leading brands in whisky and brandy at the moment. They are basically operating in Philippines, but they just got listed in Singapore as well. All right, SGX. So whatever that's being shared today is only for educational and informational purposes only. It's not intended as any investment advice. But you can basically look at the information here and make your own due diligence before you make any investment decisions. All right. So we're gonna basically talk about what the company is doing because it's just been listed in the Singapore market. What are they doing right now? Right? Why do they get listed in Singapore? Their growth strategy. And we look a little bit on the financials and what are the potential concerns being a liquor company in this part of this region. All right. So a little bit of background on Emperador. Emperador is basically founded by Andrew Lim Tan, who's basically a Chinese born in Fujian, but first migrated to Hong Kong following his family, right? And then he moved to Manila, also follow his dad, who was working in a radio factory over there. This is basically a Rex to riches success story, right? Because at the background of Andrew, he's not he does not come from a rich family background. He's basically really poor, and going to Manila, and we all know that Manila has a big demographics of really poor people, right? Um, he became an entrepreneur in 1970s, right? It includes selling home appliances, and then he did the bottling, manufacturing of brandy, and eventually even went to real estate, right? So if you look at Andrew, is really um, he is basically an entrepreneur, right? Initially he was really so poor that he wouldn't have to walk to school instead of taking bus, right? But sometime in 70s he became an entrepreneur. Home appliance is one of the earliest one that he started selling, and then brand manufacturing and real estate I just mentioned to you. This business has grown into a conglomerate. All right, this real estate business called Mega World. Basically, Andrew became a major developer, right, constructing condominiums, offices, shopping malls across Manila. He became quite a well-known name in the 80s, 70s, and 80s, right, in properties as well. And then the business has also expanded horizontally, right, into in other industries like tourism, under the Travelers International Hotel Group, infrastructure development, and also I think the one that make him a lot of money as well is the franchise for McDonald's, right, through Golden Arches Development Corporation at the time. Okay, so they're all basically rolled up into one company or one holding company called Alliance Global Group, right? So today, Alliance Global Group is one of the biggest conglomerate in the Philippines. All right. So um, and according to the SGX Investor Portal, Alliance owns 83.9% of the business that we are talking about today, which is Emperador. All right. So when Andrew launched Emperador brandy product, there was really no popular brandy brand in the Philippines. The Philippines actually already represented by quite an established market for alcoholic beverage. Actually, if you been to Manila or Philippines, you probably heard about the beer San Miguel, right? San Mig, or we go and order beer. Sometimes a lot of people like to order Mig Light, or San Miguel beer light. Um, and the Filipino brand Ginebra San Miguel was established in 1834. So it's really a long brand, and that's the reason why today the beer and alcoholic beverages are quite synonymous with San Miguel, right? And San Miguel makes the world's best-selling gin. Okay, so they are one of the biggest gin makers, gin producers in the world. According to a 2013 report from International Wine and Spirit Research, stated that Filipinos were actually the world top gin drinkers, okay, and the third biggest rum drinkers. Right, that's Philippines, right. So that's why gin was one of the biggest selling brand, one of the biggest selling liquor in the Philippines under the brand San Miguel. All right. Um, so when Emperador was launched, okay, that time the landscape was just gin and rum. Okay. And of course, to succeed in the industry that's already been dominated by other liquor products, especially big brands like San Miguel, Andrew basically have to think out of the box, right? Um, so he basically needs to know how to basically market the liquor that he wanna basically start, right? Uh, Andrew positioned Brandy as drinks for hardworking, upcoming executives, right? While other alcoholic beverage, they always feature relax, a very relaxed environment. People just drink, and it's more leisure, instead of having that sense of accomplishment, right? So if you look at Andrew, he marketed basically his product Emperador with success, right? That's I'm gonna talk about that when he talk about the strategy that he actually employed, lah. All right. Um, but Philippines is still one of the poorest countries in the region, right? Poverty rate at that time in 1985 was 59%. So how can he really sell? Although they are big liquor drinkers, especially gin and rum, you can't really sell very high end products and sell expensive liquor to the Philippine markets because you will not be able to get that market, right? And then Philippines also grow as half as fast as the other Asian countries, right? They are quite laggard in terms of economic growth, right? And you'll find themselves quite difficult pulling themselves out of getting a lot of poverty out, right? In the economy. Um, so with all this in mind, right, it's not hard to put these two together and why Andrew actually positioned Emperador as a aspirational product for young professionals, right, who wants to go from rags to riches. So that's the strategy, right? Um, so if we look at most of his ads, right, you can see Emperador always look at business executives drinking their brand instead of Ginebra, San Miguel, which use the market the liquor as more as a leisurely or a leisure drink, right? Um, so Andrew basically brand a drink for hardworking and the middle class, the working class were the biggest class in the Philippines, and one of the ways to actually get out of their hustle and bustle is to actually have a drink, and the Emperador brand basically shows that if you are drinking that brand, you feel a sense of as you have a sense of accomplishment, right? That you have succeeded. So if you still remember, like Dunhill, for example, of course, Dunhill start with a clothing brand, right? But they go into the cigarette market as well. And when we smoke cigarette, especially like Dunhill, you feel that sense of that you are, you probably a little bit more prestigious than the other brands, right? And you can see that brand until today is still one of the top selling brands for cigarettes, because again, it's a feel of accomplishment rather than the advertisements like other brands, like Salem. You still remember there's a Salem High Country, Marlboro, like Cowboy, right? But Dunhill positioned himself as the executives, sense of accomplishment, yeah, people who want to basically the working class who wants to look for success. And this is something that Emperador set itself as well when they want to think out of the box, right? How they actually market themselves as the new player in the liquor industry to actually compete with big brands or the other liquor brands as well, especially San Miguel, right? So why did Andrew choose this direction? Like I mentioned to you earlier, it's one of the poorest countries in the region, right? You know, while there are a lot of growth in the region, Philippines seems to be a laggard. So that's why he want to portray the Emperador as a rags to riches kind of story, which he personally has as well, right? Because he has gone from being really really poor into being one of the most successful businessmen right now in the Philippines, right? Um, so going down the road, you'll see the Emperador. Maybe for us, we may not have heard this brand unless you're in the Philippines, because before this, they were all marketing just in the Philippines, right? So Emperador has actually not only succeeded in promoting his own brand, but it also makes brandy a very popular brand or beverage in the Philippines. Because remember, before this, the Philippines were more popular. Gin and rum were more popular for the Philippines, but uh, uh, Andrew decided to bring in brandy, right? And then by 2012, the Philippines became the world's second biggest consumer of brandy, right? And this, of course, helped Emperador with the 97% of Philippines brandy market in 2016, became the world's biggest brandy manufacturer, right? Even because the consumption in the Philippines itself is already quite high, right? And of course, Andrew, being an entrepreneur, does not only look at the local market. He, of course, want to look at the global markets as well, and how he can expand from there, right? So Emperador has actually grown along with the Philippines economy. They already found a success way of marketing Emperador, and right now, can he do it internationally as well, right? Um, so if you look at Emperador's revenue, right, from 2012 to 2021, that 10 years, he has been growing quite steadily. It basically grows with the Philippine economy, right? So there is this very stable growth that you see in terms of business in the Philippines. Okay, but there's only so much that a person can do, right? A business can do if your growth is only coming for one country, and of course, not to mention the single market risk. If you can bring the success story out of the Philippines, they may find ways to actually build the Emperador brand against now even larger brands, okay, brandy brands, and also other brands, other whiskey brands as well. Okay, but instead of trying to bring the brand out, right, out of Philippines and introduce it to the world, one of the best ways for him at that point of time was to actually um, do some acquisitions. All right, I'll basically share with you why he find this way as an easier way to grow the business internationally. Okay, so between 2014 to 2016, now that they have already has a lot of money, they make a lot of money in the Philippines. It's time to actually acquire companies um, where they want to have their now business go overseas as well, or outside of Philippines. All right, so 2014, um, Andrew's company Alliance has actually purchased White and Mackay, which is a major Scotch whiskey brand, right? And then in 2015, okay, they have acquired the brand Thunderdor, okay, which belongs to Beam Suntory, and Thunderdor is one of the is a Spanish brand. It's one of Spain's largest and oldest brandy, right? So he actually purchased for about $291 million. So the purchase actually makes Emperador's position as the world's largest brandy company, and make the firm or alliance group one of the largest foreign investors in Spain, in Jerez, okay, which is the brandy capital of Spain. So going and buying Thunderdor, which has also a very long history, also shows that the Emperador business, right, is someone to be reckoned with, right? Because they are, first of all, in the Philippines, although they are not the oldest like San Miguel, but they have come very very strong in the past 15 years. And you can see now that they are going into the heritage of even whiskey and and Brandy, right? And 2016, there are brands belonging to Pernod Ricard, which are brandies and wines again, under the brand El Presidente. Um, El Presidente is basically is the president, right? So again, it's one, it's quite a um, uh, high up um, brands that you can find for brandies and wines, right? So it's a luxury level of brand, right, for brandies and wines. So these are the rationale for acquiring White and McKay. Okay, um, you know when Andrew want to look at the strategy, so he goes for a few marketing strategies that we know of earlier for those who want to expand horizontally, right? Um, uh, Andrew, that point of time, was actually selling brandy, okay, but he wants to get into whiskey business because whiskey was the second fastest growing liquor segment globally, next to brandy. Okay, if I can still remember, during when I was in the when younger years, right, parents or even uncles, aunties, they used to drink brandy. That's the main liquor that they drink at that time, right? But during my time growing up, as a young adult, whiskey seemed to be the flavor, and brandy has actually quieted down a little bit. Okay, so whiskey was the second fastest growing spirit segment globally, right? So, and that's the reason why he wants to get into the whiskey business as well. And by acquiring White and McKay, they have also increased market access. One of the main reason why they want to acquire White and McKay as well is because White McKay itself has a global distribution network of over 50 countries. So by acquiring them, it opens new channels, right? New distribution channels, not just for the whiskey brand, but for the Emperador brand as well, right? So eventually, Emperador is able to gain access to this network. It can be used for sales channel for their brandy instead of trying to go in organically, which is going to take some time, especially in the European market where wine, brandy, and whiskey is a red ocean, right? There are a lot of players there who are going into this. And therefore, if Andrew comes in himself and try to grow organically using the Emperador brand, he may not be able to grow fast. And fast is also a keyword, a key strategy for liquor companies, or in fact, food and beverage companies, to get a foothold and to compete in the market. All right. Um, the acquisition of Fundador, which is Spain's oldest and biggest brandy company. Fundador was established or founded in 1730. Right, they are they are Spain's oldest and biggest brandy and sherry maker. Right, so it is quite a big achievement for Emperador, because they themselves is a new player, and has only been around for 40 years. Right, and we look at Fundador, for example, it's been there for about nearly 400 years. So by the acquisition of Fundador, it gives really uh, the Emperador brand a more well-established brand, by having a company or a brandy company that was formed in 1730s, is as probably as old as one can remember, lah, right? So the deal gave Emperador access to the Fundador brand, okay, as well as the vineyards, the distillery, the aging wine houses, the bottling facilities, lab, and also the distribution centers. Right, so they basically buy the whole thing, lah. Okay. Um, and also, why the reason why Emperador acquired these companies as well, because the spirit industry or the liquor industry is unique, right? As some of the manufacturing facilities cannot be easily replicated, right? Like cars, for example, right? Um, Actually, you look at drinks, especially liquor like whiskey, and now we're talking about brandy, for example. The brandy taste actually depends on the cask being used in the manufacturing process, right? Casks that are previously stored, different wines in brandy will, with different colors, it result in different colors, aromas, and also flavors. The longer the wine is kept in the cask, the more intense this transfer will be. Okay, it smells like, so you have this woody kind of oak taste, this kind of cherry kind of aftertaste, and so that it all comes basically from the different cask. So you can't just simply produce, or distill a liquor and put it in a bottle. It's probably going to be tasteless, right? So the cask itself is an intangible asset, right? Is a asset that is very important in the making of most liquors, right? The Fundador, of course, the Fundador deal, when you acquire Fundador, also comes with, of course, intangible assets like, the traditional brandy making techniques, because remember, they have been around for 400 years, right? Almost 400 years. So Emperador now basically own Fundador's modern and also traditional brandy making techniques. Okay, and again, the whole process of uh, getting brandy or wine or any liquor is also very important, and it also is quite specific, is quite exclusive for the different producers of liquors, right? That's why you get the different taste, the different texture, the aroma, and all that. Okay, the technique itself is very important. Okay, so Fundador get access to this old traditional way, and of course a modern way of producing brandy as well. The other intangible asset is a historical brand, right? Because again, it's a heritage that Fundador has. Fundador in Spanish means founder, is the birthplace of Spanish brandy. They have actually supplied the Spanish royal family since the 17th century. And basically, Fundador has the privilege of using the Spanish royal coat of arms on its bottles and boxes. It's the same like having, if you want to call yourself a Swiss watch, for example, there are certain criteria that you need to have when you are making your watch, right? For example, you have to be there in Switzerland, right? You have to use, a certain percentage of their raw materials from Switzerland and all that, to be called yourself as a Swiss brand, right? So, Fundador is basically having this chop, right? This brand that, this is actually a Spanish brand, right? It's a Spanish brandy, right? Even some of his cask, okay, that stores the brandy, even have signatures of the Spanish kings and queens. So by having Fundador is basically that, now I have access to so-called Spanish, right, or the original or the very old heritage Spanish brandy brand. All right. Um, and if you look at, by purchasing all these brandy and whiskey company like White and McKay, they also have access to and casks can be really expensive. There's a really high value, right? In July 2022, there's a single whiskey cask sold for a world record 16 million pounds. I don't know, like, I'm not really a whiskey drinker or brandy drinker. I'm just a leisure one. But for those, who knows about whiskey and brandy, uh, if you are really into it, you will know, right? Once you drink the drink, where it comes from, what kind of cars they use. So basically, I think the one that's being sold for 16 million pounds have maybe have actually got some rich guy excited, and some rich guy wanting to get that cask so that the whiskey will be produced from that cask, right? So there's a whiskey cask fund launched this year in Singapore, which allows accredited investors to invest a minimum of $50,000 in premium whiskey cask. So the cask itself can be a form of investment, because over time, increase in price as well. Same thing like if you're buying watches, some of the watches, right? It increases over time. Okay, so based on some reports, the premium whiskey cask can deliver an annual return of 15 to 20%. uh, you know, if you look at stocks also, sometimes you look at what 15 and 20% is quite much, right? Quite a lot. And you do not know that whiskey cask can also increase in value over time, but of course, it has to be premium ones, lah. Okay. Um, so the thing is that, if you look at Andrews or the Alliance Group wanting to expand their business out of Philippines globally, he has to do it big. It has to do fast. Okay. Basically, he learns about the F&B industry, right? Because again, it's food and beverage, right? So beverage is a liquor, and most of this business, they grow following the same strategies, right? Um, So if we look at selling drinks, selling beverage is basically just selling water, because main component in in a drink, even if it's liquor, the main component is water, right? Uh, you know, marketing and branding is a big deal in food and beverage. I mean, anybody can produce water. If you look even like here today, you can see a lot of what do you call uh, distilled waters, right? Or filtered waters. Or you can see a lot of brands like Spritzer and so on and so forth, right? And it's basically, I think I mean the cost is really that low, right? But in order to get into the market, again, marketing and branding is very important, right? Like for example, this brand here called Liquid Death, which is it's mountain water. Okay, it's basically mineral water lah. Okay, 12 cans of water can be sold at $30, 30 US dollars per pack, right? And you can see here even mineral water with different brands have different prices as well. But you're basically drinking mostly water, right? The Grey Goose vodka, for example, which is 60% water, and of course the rest of them are alcohol, so it's sold about $25 a bottle. So how do they get that kind of premium price? Is depending on their market, right? It's depending on their brand, and their marketing as well. Okay, so Coca-Cola has always been a standard for business case studies, right? Um, so of course Coca-Cola started first, and one of the biggest or legendary investor, people like Warren Buffett has been investing in Coca-Cola, right? And today they still have Coca-Cola as well. By 1974, Pepsi's CEO Donald Kendall began challenging Coca-Cola's dominance for the global non-alcoholic beverage market, right? Because there's if you hear about cola wars, there's always these two companies that's always been fighting for that market share, right? Coca-Cola, which has always been the leader, Pepsi, which is relatively new, which tastes about the same like Coca-Cola. But then again, if you ask me also, if you give me Pepsi or Coca-Cola, I will not be able to tell the difference, lah. Right? So really, they've been competing quite aggressively. As from 1975, for example, you look at the spending. When Coca-Cola spent a lot, Pepsi spent even more, right? You can look at the advertising spend in the past, that 20 years period, 1975 to 1995, and even today they still advertising, right? Imagine if one day Coca-Cola stopped advertising, everybody will be thinking, "What happened to Coca-Cola? Is it still around?" Right? So for them, advertising is still very important, right? The more Pepsi and Coca-Cola spent, the more market share they grew, right? They increase the market share. So the advertising basically has a correlation, a positive correlation with their revenue that they be getting, right? And also the market share. Okay, so in 2021 alone, Coca-Cola spent $4.1 billion US dollars on advertisements, while Pepsi spent 3.5 billion. Okay, so how many companies can actually do this? Isn't it? I mean, just imagine advertising itself is already 4.1 billion. If you combine both of them together, is about 7.6 billion US dollars to promote these cola drinks, right? Like I said earlier, what will happen, do you think, if Pepsi or Coca-Cola, if they stop spending these huge sums, right? Of course, one will basically overtake the other, lah. Okay. So bigger revenue base needs bigger marketing, right? The more you market it, the more you can always see Coca-Cola or Pepsi always advertise in different seasons, right? You have sports. You can see they market it as a sports, not really a sports drink, but a a drink to quench your thirst, right? And other stuff. So they're always there, lah. And during Christmas time or during Hari Raya time, they're always there to market their drinks. Okay, um, so of course, Coca-Cola, one of the ways to actually expand their beverage as well business is to also look at buying up other brands, right? Like in 2010, Coca-Cola buy vitamin water maker Glaso for about $4.1 billion, right? So the key is basically consumers are really they have the taste change over time, right? And this mineral water, and I still remember when I was playing badminton as well. You can see this vitamin water, which is not cheap, I think it costs about 4 to 5 ringgit per bottle like this, right? It's basically like 100 plus, without the gas, plus of course a little bit of taste, a different taste lah, different fruit taste, right? So again, because Coca-Cola know that the trend and the taste of consumers have changed, and therefore the other way to get into that kind of business, like what Emperador is doing, is not trying to build the brand themselves, but to already buy a brand that has already been established there, to grow as fast as possible, right? Um, so if another brand starts hurting another brand, the owner can shut down that brand. Okay, so it's like, if I want to sell, let's say, Coca-Cola mineral water or Coca-Cola vitamin water, if does not go well, then the Coca-Cola brand itself will be in trouble, right? But right now, if you look at, although vitamin water, for example, does not really show you Coca-Cola brand all around, it's just still vitamin water brand, right? So if let's say it doesn't make it, people don't drink vitamin water anymore. The Coca-Cola brand is still intact because the brand that goes down is the vitamin water, right? Um, so it's important to have that kind of strategy, and that's the reason why you see most of the food and beverage companies, right? They actually control um, other brands. Okay, I think for Malaysians, for example, we have Nestle, right, that produces Milo, right, and all the other stuff, all the other fast consumer goods and products and services. Although you can see it's produced by Nestle, manufactured by Nestle, but again they hold that brand, right? But you look at the whole thing, right? These 10 companies control the world's food market, right? Like companies like Nestle, we have Coca-Cola, we have PepsiCo, Unilever, Kellogg's, Danone, and Danone, right? And the others as well. These 10 companies actually supplies most of the food that we see in supermarkets. All right, world's supermarkets. So in 2021, the Guardian study seemed confirmed that this four or less, or that less than four companies actually control over 40% share of market for 85% of groceries. All right, so they are all basically controlled. You don't really see them when you purchase that item unless you go and look at where they're manufactured and where it's being produced. But really, it all goes to these 10 companies, right? So of course there are also more reasons to become big, and which why Emperador is going into this strategy, right? Going big, going fast. Is also a resource scramble. Okay, food security and supply access is becoming a major issue right now. Okay, partly due to geopolitical tensions, climate change, and also of course the increase in population. Right, uh, if you are not big out there, the suppliers may not want to give it to you, right? For example, right, let's say I am Benny Cola, right, or Benny Food or whatever, and I compete if, let's say, Nestle, right? And if the food resources are quite limited, who do you think the suppliers will sell? Will they sell it to Nestle, or will they sell it to Benny Food Supplies, right? Um, and of course, bigger companies has louder voice as well. Okay, and because if you're so big, you provide job opportunities, you pay a lot of taxes, and that's the reason why governments love big companies, right? Because it helps them in their economic balance by providing jobs, right? By providing and by paying taxes. Okay, then of course for them they have a loud voice, right? Being a very big company. In Malaysia, they have certain, in other countries or in the globally, they have certain voice, even in the governments itself, to demand, let's say, there's any regulatory changes, laws or whatsoever, right? Or maybe even getting better treatment than the other people. Okay, um, so really, bigger companies have louder voice, and of course when it comes to getting supplies, getting raw materials, bigger companies will probably have the first hand advantage. All right, so the Andrew also, of course, look at the food and beverage business, how companies really grow and to be big, and he wants to be a major player as well, right? And now it's starting from, let's say, now it starts from, of course, earlier in brandy in the Philippines, and then he went to whiskey, and eventually he's going to look at being one of the major beverage players, right? Like Coca-Cola or even PepsiCo, in the beverage segment. Okay. So according to researchers at the Institute of Alcohol Studies, okay, which is a UK-based organization that tracks the alcohol industry, there are three main ways, okay, alcoholic beverage companies are expanding. Okay, look at all the alcoholic, not beverage, but this is alcoholic beverage expanding. This is how the companies are expanding. Number one, they target new customers by selling in more different markets. All right. Um, Players can reach new customers in markets either selling more affordable drinks to the mass market, right? Because if I think the mass market is a big market for drinkers, right? And this is in the Philippines as well. Even though the population are mostly poor, but they're one of the biggest gin and rum drinkers and now brandy drinkers in the world. Okay, but you can't sell at premium prices, all right? So you sell affordable drinks to the mass market. Or secondly, is by taking premium Western brands and targeting middle class customers or entry level products. So how can we take the premium brand and then sell it cheap, okay, to the customers, to the mass market? Okay, because always premium is always selling to the niche people who are brandy or gin or whiskey connoisseurs, right? They really love, they're willing to pay for it. But can you bring that premium whiskey brand or brandy? It not doesn't mean that the whiskey or the brandy itself is premium, right? But it's the brand, right? Can it bring it to target the middle or the working class people? Okay. The second way of expanding the market share is basically encouraging customers to drink more. All right. They always create new ways, right, or occasions to consume alcohol. Like now, for example, you always hear about food pairing with alcoholic beverages, right? If you eat Japanese food, for example, you pair it with let's say sake and a different kind of sake, right? And now people are talking about pairing Japanese food with whiskey, right? Because you see, whiskey is also quite big in Japan, right? And even Japanese companies have bought over whiskey or Scotch whiskey companies in Scotland itself. So their tastes have changed as well from the traditional sake to eventually go into whiskey. And now they also teach how do you pair Japanese food with whiskey. And you can look at here as well, Western food. When you eat Italian food, you pair it with wine. If you eat, for example, barbecue, you can pair it with some brandy or whiskey. There's this brandy or whiskey, which is marketed as dessert drinks, right? So again, it's basically encouraging customers to drink more. Okay. Uh, Number three is to get customers to trade up for more expensive drinks. And of course, for more expensive drinks, the brand is there already. The margins are higher, right? Because like I said earlier, the main component is water, is how you brand it, right? Um, so you can sell it either the mass market cheap with very low margin, or you can sell more expensive premium drinks, okay, at very high price, and therefore your margin is very high, right? But it's very difficult for legal companies to actually just focus on one, right? There are companies that does that, right? That only focus on really premium, only really drinks for those who appreciate drinks, right? Uh, but if those customers are gone, then their business will go down as well. All right, so that's why most of these beverage companies have also started to look at how you can produce and make use of the brand, like Dunhill I mentioned to you earlier, right, to expand the business by using the brand that's already been established, and selling a little bit more lower quality drinks to the mass market, right? So this strategy has been successfully been applied in the UK and US, right? We look at the US spirit drinks demand growth. For super premium drinks is 7%. The premium drink is 2%. The value drinks, the one that you get in supermarkets or convenience stores, You don't see a lot of growth, right, for that, because you see the taste of drinkers eventually change. Okay, a person normally start with the cheap drinks, as they grow older, they want a more refined drink, a better drink, so they're willing to spend more. And it's like, if you're drinking um, um, uh, whiskey, for example, right? You have that red label, Johnny Walker, right? And then you go to the black label, and then it goes to the gold label, right? But people who are into Johnny Walker, that brand will continue to drink that brand, right? So you can see that the growth in the super premium is increasing as of course, as people move up into the status of society. They do better, they drink better drinks as well. All right. um, so if you look at the UK beer sales mix as well, you can see that premium beer has increased faster than the non-premium beer. Okay, so the premium market is also a big market, because that's where the margins are bigger. Okay. So if you look at Emperador's growth strategy, right? So after looking and analyzing how the food and beverage company expand, and how can the alcoholic or liquor business grow their brand, so Emperador has come up with its own brand strategy, right? Own growth strategy. When we talk about introducing higher end products to its native market in the Philippines, right? So Fundador is very crucial, because Fundador is a very well established brandy brand in Spain, right? So if I'm a Philippine, so I know about Fundador, and I go to Spain, right, and find out, well, Fundador is actually a very old company, and everybody knows Fundador, but in Philippines it's still new. It's like, it's like us, lah, right? When you buy a car, you have the local Proton brand, but then let's say Proton, you still remember that Proton bought Lotus cars, right? Lotus brand. So it's basically, Lotus is a sports car which is well known globally, and they brought it um, to Malaysia. Of course, you can't sell the local Lotus brand, but if you still remember, that Proton cars at the point of time was, um, you know, uh, tuned by Lotus, right? So they tried to bring that brand. Of course, they sell Proton cars, but it's tuned by Lotus. It makes it a bit more premium. Okay, so Fundador did the same thing, right? You look at Fundador, Supremo, for example, a higher end brand that sell in the market for 265 US dollars. So if I'm going to sell the Fundador Supremo back in the Philippines, I may not be able to sell, right? Because remember, there are more poor people in the Philippines than the well-to-do people in the Philippines, right? So he has to do something, which is he had to build another brand. All right, here is built Thunderdor Light. So it's a lower version in terms of brandy quality. I don't know. Again, I'm not sure. If you ask me, probably taste these two brandy, I will not be able to differentiate it, lah. Right? But paying only $6 for a Thunderdor brandy shows that, wow, I'm actually getting something that is of quality, right? Not knowing that this one is actually from Emperador, if I'm a Filipino, right? But it's actually because Emperador has really bought over Thunderdor, he can come up with a lighter brand or lower end brand to suit the Filipino market, right? So the price difference is big, and therefore everybody is able to drink the Thunderdor brand in the Philippines. All right. So basically, to premiumize its portfolio, right? Um, the poverty rate is now 23% compared to 60% when Emperador was founded. I think this strategy, if you introduce this maybe 30 years ago, the market may not be prepared, because at the time the poverty rate was still very high, right? And then in the Philippines, of course, liquor was cheap. You can get in any convenience store for just less than $1, right? So the kind of drinks, you can probably see this kind of drinks if you go to the old convenience store, right? Brands like Sahib lah, all brands that you haven't heard of. Even Tima, right? If you still remember Tima, all these are cheap whiskeys that you can get, right? Cheap alcoholic drinks you can get. So at that point of time, but today you look at Malaysia, for example, as of course for the drinkers, right? They go into more premium brands, right? You don't go to 7-Eleven, buy those cheap brands anymore. You buy at least a Johnny Walker red label, although it's a lower end, but it's Johnny Walker, right? Um, so Philippines is prepared right now, right? That the income has grown, of course. The poverty rate has gone down as well. So the Philippines is now one of the fastest growing economies in the world, okay, according to Factsheet, a research data provider, and therefore the taste of having better things in life has increased as well, and therefore the readiness to consume a bit higher end or higher end brand products has increased as well. All right. So the focus again was on a whiskey business, because that was the fastest growing spirit at that point of time, right? Brandy initially was, but then it went to whiskey. So whiskey appears to be more popular in markets like China and in the US. Okay, so China, and I still remember I went to China like 15 years ago. Everybody was drinking beer, right? In any makan place that you go, they always have beer. It's like overflowing of beer, lah. Then 5 years later, when I went back there, people are starting to drink wine, right? And today you go, you see that their tastes have changed, right? Because remember China, maybe 15, 20 years ago, they were still developing. They was not that developed yet. So their taste is still, as long as you got the drink, lah, right? And then it goes to higher and it goes even higher end today. Okay. But whiskey has been a fast growing liquor in the past 10 years or so, right? So if you look at whiskey's market share in the US, it's 25%, okay, which is 4 times of that of brandy, which is only 6%. So one fourth, right, is whiskey. Um, but the market share, vodka has the biggest market share, right? Vodka in the US, I'm quite surprised as well. So the second part of the growth strategy is to internationalize the business, right? So we already um, build quite a good business in the Philippines. Now, how do we get it outside of the Philippines? Because currently, Emperador's revenue, 65% of it comes from the Philippines. But Andrew's strategy is to actually target a 50% of sales profit comes from outside the Philippines by 2025. So you don't want to depend on just one market alone. So by 2025, half of the revenue comes from the international markets. All right. Then you have, it's like he's an investor also. Like you don't put all your risk in one basket, right? So you spread out the risk. So you want to internationalize the business. Um, Now, Emperador thinks that they will have an edge over the Western rivals because of his Asian heritage or Asian pedigree, because they are Asian company, right? So they know Asian better. Okay, so they can fine tune the products, right, to suit consumers. I don't think so. Like Western in Western market, you have light beers, right? I mean, it's not really that because beer itself is really quite cheap in the Western market. Light beers is something that if you're a drinker, maybe for a new drinker, you look at light beer, but most of the drinkers they just want the hard old beer, right? But in the local market, and there's a reason why you see there's a lot of light, even like San Miguel, you have the big light beer, San Miguel light beer. Okay, here you see the Thunderdor light, right? So Emperor thinks they will have an edge, right, on how to market their products in the Asian market. I don't think so. They want to expand so much in the Western market. They are just basically buying brands in the West and try to sell it in the Asian market, right? So for them, they think that they can understand the market better, right? And Emperador seems to be very excited about China growth prospects, right? From 2018 to 2020, that 3 years of period, Emperador's Thunderdor brand of brandy, right? Volume actually steadily rise 18% a year in UK, US, Canada, Latin America, and Africa, right? And over the same period, the biggest growth was actually from China. Okay, the growth in China itself was 216%. And this is where I think Emperador is really targeting, right? In a very fast growing market. And not only Emperador, the bigger players in the market, the biggest, or the two of the world's biggest liquor makers are also betting very big on China. Pernod Ricard, right, and Diageo, they are investing to build their whiskey distillery in China. Okay, um, and also Pernod Ricard. So they are right now investing because they know that the growth in China in terms of liquor consumption has grown really exponentially. All right. So they are not alone. Emperador is not alone, and relatively, Emperador is still relatively quite new with this big compared to these big companies like Diageo and Pernod Ricard, right? And that's the reason why he thinks that because he's Asian based, he know Asian markets better, he can market better and compete with Diageo or Pernod Ricard or any other bigger brands in the liquor industry. All right. So one of the strategies as well is they're already listed in the Philippines for quite a number of years, right? And recently they wanted to they of course they are listed already on SGX, or the Singapore Stock Exchange, right? And as a way, Singapore has always been like the Asian financial hub, right? It used to be Hong Kong, but of course right now Hong Kong is under China, and Hong Kong itself has quite an has quite its own troubles lah, right? And Singapore of course has its way of getting a lot of foreign investors coming into the markets, right? So it makes sense for Emperador to actually list in Singapore. Number one is to get a bigger access of different pool of investors, right? International, I mean, Singapore being a more international driven market, you can see a lot of international funds being set up in Singapore, right? So it gives them a bigger access to a bigger pool of investors. And if you look at the market cap in Singapore companies itself, is 660 US billion at the moment, whereas the market cap of the Philippine Stock Exchange companies is only 260 billion. That's almost about 3 times more. All right. So Emperador is eyeing Singapore significantly larger capital market, right? The same thinking that also drove like Alibaba, to list in the United States, technology company like Grab to list in the US. You have other aspirational Asian companies to have the first footing in the larger pool of funds is to have an access in Singapore. And Singapore is being strategically located as well in the Southeast Asian region and to China. All right. So you can see, I mean, Singapore is always a gateway for Southeast Asian companies, even for the Western companies, Western funds. They're all set up in Singapore to have access to the Southeast Asian market. All right. So the benefits of having higher market cap is, a higher share price, higher market cap, a bigger company. Um, it allows Emperador to have more money, right, to actually buy other companies, right? Because again, the strategy is to try to expand as fast, as big as possible, following the F&B growth strategy and following the liquor companies' growth strategy, right? So Emperador plans to grow even further by making more acquisitions, right, or even expanding its production capacity. So they are growing very fast. They understand the local market, the Asian market better, where they are able to compete with the Asian or with the Western liquor companies, especially in China, where the growth rate is highest, right? And has been Emperador strategy, and now moving to SGX and trying to bring their product out of the Philippines and trying to capture a market share in the global market. This will probably be the first step for Emperador. All right. So I'm just going to basically share with you some of the financials. And of course, in Singapore, it's just listed. You won't see much financials from the Singapore Stock Exchange, but these financials here, you can actually get from sgx.com. It's published here, but this is from basically numbers from the Philippines. All right. So if you look at the profit and loss, you look at revenue has grown steadily. 2017 was about 42 billion pesos. It went to 55 billion, right? In 2021, you can see it was quite steady throughout the years as well. And in 2020, during the COVID-19 pandemic, in 2021, you can see that the revenue hasn't really been affected that much, right? Um, and you can see their operating income after minus of their operation, their expenses, still healthy, right? And 2017, the net income before taxes was 7 billion, right? And that grew to 12.8 billion about 80% growth in that 5-year period, right? In terms of profit before tax, right? And you look at the net income profit after tax as well, it's grown from 6 billion to 9 billion, which is quite um, it's quite impressive for a liquor company, right? And they do pay dividends as well. Of course, Singapore is still new, so you don't see that yet. But in 2021, they did not actually pay dividends. I think it's because they probably need to expand more, or maybe they need some money to buffer the effect of the COVID-19, right? In terms of cash flows, they were quite well as well, right? Again, not just going to go through here very briefly. They managed to they don't really have a lot of loans except for longer term loans, probably because of purchasing of other companies and all that, right? So they were. If you look at a cash position, I mean, there are times also they are negative, they are positive, but it wasn't really cause of concern. And if you look at the chart over here, this will show you the net profit, revenue, and operating cash flow over time, right, in this 5-year period. Okay, so the revenue, you look at the blue line at the top here, has been steadily growing up, right? Net profit has also been growing, okay, commensurate, it moves together with revenue. But what is the cash flow has increased quite a lot, right? That means the businesses that they've and that they have actually did, okay, actually translate quite a lot into cash as well, all right? So probably also that their credit is not that much lah, right? When it comes to this kind of business. Another thing they want to look at is their gross profit and net profit margin has also grown over the years, right? From 2017, the gross profit margin was about 18.4%. The net profit margin was 14.8, right? And that has gone up actually in 2021. Okay, so margin has actually increased, and I think particularly mostly due to the higher premium brand that they sell, bringing Thunderdor where they sell at probably if you can sell a brand for maybe $2 or $3, now with the Thunderdor brand they can sell slightly higher, probably about $6 to make that additional margin, right? So their margin has increased going from the mass market, right, selling at very low margin kind of prices, now is able to sell a slightly higher margin, so that the strategy actually works for them, right? By acquiring Thunderdor, White and McKay whiskey, and some other brands as well, has actually helped them to increase their profit margin. Because if you look at the revenue growth, it's steady, right? But it doesn't have a much bigger growth in its profit margin as we have looked at earlier. Okay, so basically this is their balance sheet, and the balance sheet of course has been growing as well. Um, uh, and if you look at their assets, these are basically total assets, and these are their liabilities lah. You can see that the liabilities really is not that big, right? The current liability is not big. The long-term debt is of course uh, um, uh, not that big as well. But you combine them, but it's all manageable, right? So they're managing the company quite well, and I guess that Andrew Tan, being an entrepreneur with multiple businesses, not just the whiskey business, right? Because he has also property development, he has a tourism company, and he has the McDonald's franchise. That's very important as well. So for him, he really know how to manage the operations well enough. All right. So these are some of the financial ratios. You can see the returns of asset has grown over time, right? The returns of equity has also grown, not really that drastically, but you can see it's growing quite steadily. The net profit margin has grown, the operating margin has grown as well, right? We look at the current ratio, the quick ratio, they're quite liquid as well. Okay, so fundamentally, it's not great. It's like any other fast consumer or fast moving consumer goods and products. Okay, the growth is always steady, right? You look at, like, for example, Nestle or Dutch Lady, kind of business, when retail business, you don't really see big growth. So this is more like a steady growth, steady companies lah. All right. So I'm just gonna go through a few potential concerns before we end the session. You guys can ask questions if you have any questions at all. Right? You can pose the questions on the chat. All right. There are three major concerns: geopolitical and pandemic risks, like we have already faced through. But you see the pandemic times also, you don't see it affect the revenue that much, right? the local risk, and also all alcohol consumption risk. Okay, we all talk about the Russian and Ukraine war. Okay, war does not always negatively affect the stock market. Some companies may be hurt more than the others, right? So could a global or regional war, and let's say the Ukraine and Russia war escalates, right? Will it impact Emperador's supply chain? Okay, now it really depends because Emperador brandy is made in the Philippines itself. Okay, while the Fundador brandy is produced in Spain. So if a war impacts Spain and not the Philippines, the production of Fundador will likely see a bigger impact. Okay, not Emperador. Okay, Emperador will still go on as usual. Okay, it's more on the Fundador brand. Okay, if the war affects Europe and it affects Spain, right? Other effects of war include higher commodity and transportation price, right? And this basically risk um, would pull their margin lower. Okay, but so far we've seen, even with the pandemic, supply chain issues that we have, the war in Ukraine and Russia, over the past 2 years, their margins has not dropped, but in fact it went the other way around. The margins has actually increased. All right. So the way they manage it, I think you have to give hats off to Andrew Tan and the team, lah. All right. Now, the issues that we see in the past few years, we can see the net profit margin for the quarter on quarter has gone down a little bit. Um, uh, Overall net margin, especially brandy, right? I think brandy is because also the taste of brandy is not as strong as the growth in the whiskey segment, right? So you see whiskey here has actually increased quite significantly, right? The margin, the net profit margin business in Emperador from 14.5% to 21.45%. That's quite a lot. That's quite big. Okay. So again, it really depends, right? So if you look at it overall, it doesn't really affect Emperador's business that much. Okay, even with the current pandemic, supply chain issue that it has created, and also the Russian and Ukraine war, right? There is local risk, and that's the reason why Emperador wants to go out as well to expand the business overseas. And by 2025, he targets to achieve 50% of the revenue coming from overseas, right? Because if you only depend on one country, which is the Philippines, Philippines still rank as one of the lowest political stability countries. This is by Australia's Lowy Institute. It ranks 22 out of the 26 Asian companies, whereas Singapore is ranked number 2 after New Zealand, right? So really, in terms of political stability, so getting into Singapore is also another footprint that shows that I'm quite a stable company. I'm not just operating just in the Philippines alone, and I gain capital access into the Singapore market as well. All right. So of course, political instability in the Philippines has been around for some years, but again, being a long-established firm, Emperador under the Alliance Group is no stranger to the political machines in the Philippines. They have a voice as being one of the biggest conglomerate in the Philippines. They affect also policy makers, right? So of course, whatever that has been controlled, anything also can happen. There's always this local risk, right? Alcohol consumption trends, they maybe change, like from brandy to whiskey, and whiskey maybe to some other stuff, right? uh the drinking culture, okay, is still there in the Philippines, but will it change, right? Because 65% of revenue still currently comes from the Philippines. Okay. um, there are new entrants that's going to come up with exciting alternatives and potentially decrease Emperador's market share, right? Even Korea, for example, has bring its soju trend right now. Okay, I'm not sure about Philippines, but in Malaysia you can see the drinking pattern has changed as well, right? um, and the younger consumers are also changing in its drinking behavior. Maybe the older times people used to drink more as compared to the younger generation today, lah. All right. So a lot of companies have actually gone into a total beverage. Now you can see even like traditional liquor or alcoholic beverage companies have produced right now non-alcoholic beverage. Okay, it's like a non-alcoholic beer. Okay. Um, so you can see other companies or big companies, they are also looking and buying other brands, right? Like Japan Suntory Beverage and Food, which is very big, one of the biggest liquor company in Japan. known for his Yamazaki whiskey and also Asahi Group Holdings. They are also looking at, they're pushing Boss and Wanda Coffee. Right? So you go to supermarket, you can see the Boss Coffee and Wanda Coffee. It actually belongs to Suntory Beverage, right? Um, so they are looking at diversification because there is a risk of change in consumer trends, especially when it comes to liquor. All right. But this is long term. You don't see this happening short term because you know consumption changes. It takes a while. But for now, you look at the trend, the growth of demand for liquor, and you look at the business. Emperador, in the liquor business in Philippines, has also grown quite steadily. We don't really see it coming down yet. All right. So in summary, look at Emperador. So I mean, it's up to you to make your own decisions, right? To look into this company further, to do your own more due diligence. But I've really explained to you basically the story of Emperador, how they started in the Philippines, how a very fairly poor man from China who went to Hong Kong and then to Philippines started one of the biggest conglomerate in the Philippines, right? And now wants to build the whiskey brandy business not just in Philippines but also globally. All right. So current achievements they've done, they have really proven success in the home market, right? Able to get themselves seen, right? It's not just Jinbera's San Miguel right now, but you also have the Emperador brand, right? And they also managed to buy big international players, right? Like Thunderdor, like White and McKay, just mentioned to you earlier. Okay. Look at the midterm growth strategy, the premiumization and internalization, focus on whiskey and China. They expect, okay, of course, this is their target to have 50% of their profits, of their revenue come from global markets outside of Philippines. All right. They have listed successfully in SGX, which give them access to larger pool of investors. All right. Um, and of course, for the future strategy, they continue to have merger and acquisitions, diversify their products. Right now, it's still beverage. I'm not sure whether they want to go into the food market as well. But right now, is try to grow horizontally, right, in the beverage business. So they're very currently still focused on liquor. From brandy to whiskey. I'm not sure what else is going to go into lah. All right. So the risk I just mentioned to you earlier, there's geopolitical tensions, like the risk of Russia and UK war. Hope it doesn't extend further, right? The supply chain disruption and also the consumption of alcoholic trend. Okay, so the question right now for Emperador is that, of course, now it's still early to tell because they just started uh, trying to grow globally. But can Emperador replicate its success in the Philippines in the global market? All right. Okay, before I end, I just want to make an announcement. If you guys are interested to, look at Singapore companies, look at the fundamentals, data, and also price charts, you go to sg.equitystracker.com. It's also a first website that shows or give or provide information on the Singapore real estate uh, investment trust or REITs in a very detailed format. Okay, so if you want to stay informed and stay ahead in the Singapore market, head to sg.equitystriker.com. And this website is currently is basically open for everyone for free. All right, so just go there and you can get more information over there. All right. All right, so I'll open for questions and answers right now. You have any questions, you can type it there. If there's no questions, then I'll end this presentation. I want to thank everyone for tonight, for joining us tonight. All right. So I'll just give you another minute to ask questions. If there are no questions, then I'm going to end this tonight's webinar. Okay. I guess there's no question. You can see people are also moving off. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. I wish you guys all the best and have a good evening. Thank you.